What if I told you that the Israel you see today is not the Israel that God revealed to the prophets? I have seen in the records of the soul that nations may carry the same name but not the same spirit, and the form of a thing can live long after its essence has faded. The modern Israel that men trace upon maps with borders, treaties, and flags is not the same Israel that was born in covenant and fire. This is not accusation, it is recognition. Spiritually, the vibration of a people can shift just as the body changes with age, and when the vibration no longer resonates with divine order, the name remains but the meaning departs. I was shown this truth when I sought to understand why the world prays for peace in a land that has forgotten the very peace it was meant to embody. In vision, I saw the land shimmering like heat upon the desert, ancient and wounded, the prayers of prophets still echoing across the hills of Galilee, and I heard the question that pierces every age. What is Israel? Is it a nation, a faith, or a state of consciousness? The voice that answered was not my own. It said, Israel is not the soil beneath your feet, it is the covenant written upon the heart. I understood then that the Israel of Scripture and the Israel of politics are reflections cast by different lights. The first was a manifestation of divine order, the second, a construction of human will. The modern state, born in 1948, rose from ashes and tears, and in that birth many saw prophecy fulfilled. They believed the promise to Abraham had taken form again. But I tell you, the fulfillment of prophecy is not found in land alone. It lives in alignment with the law of spirit, and where obedience fades, prophecy pauses. When I read the vibrations of the time, I found that the new Israel was founded not by faith but by necessity. It was the answer of humanity to centuries of persecution, not the answer of heaven to centuries of prayer. God permitted it, yes, but not every permission is endorsement. Men often confuse survival with destiny, yet destiny flows only where the heart aligns with divine principle. I have watched the faithful around the world, Christians and Jews alike, defend the modern nation with zeal, believing they defend God's will. They quote the words spoken to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, but they forget the second half of the covenant, the condition that blessing requires righteousness. To bless unrighteousness is to curse wisdom. I saw in the spiritual records that blind allegiance has never been counted as faith, for faith is not obedience to nations, but obedience to God. Many would ask, then what is Israel to God now? And I would answer as I was shown. Israel is wherever a soul wrestles with truth, wherever a man or woman seeks to live in harmony with the divine purpose. Israel is not bloodline, it is consciousness. The name itself means he who struggles with God, and that struggle exists within each of us. The modern Israel, as a government, may hold the soil of Abraham, but does it still hold the spirit? That is the question that every seeker must ask. I have no desire to judge nations, only to recall their purpose. When a nation was chosen, it was not chosen for privilege, but for demonstration, to show what happens when humanity aligns with divine law. When obedience flourished, the land prospered. When greed and pride replaced humility, the land withered. History records this pattern, and spirit confirms it. Yet the people of the world remember only the promise, not the principle. I have seen this same forgetting within individuals who pray for blessings but neglect obedience, who call upon God but refuse his order. Nations are but larger souls, collective expressions of belief, and so the Israel of today stands as a mirror to humanity itself, brilliant in survival, powerful in intellect, yet uncertain in spirit. In the record of time, I saw the ancient prophets walking beside rivers and deserts, warning that the covenant was more than possession. It was participation. You shall be my people, said the Lord, and I will be your God, but only if the people walked in his ways. When they strayed, the prophets cried out, not to condemn, but to recall. And now, I feel that same echo calling across the modern age. The world supports Israel politically, but few remember the spiritual map beneath the geography. It was never about borders, it was about order. Never about territory, but testimony. Israel was meant to reveal how a nation could live as a reflection of divine justice. Today it reveals instead how easily a sacred name can be used without sacred purpose. Still, the record shows mercy. God has not withdrawn his promise, but he waits for remembrance. The covenant sleeps, but is not dead. It awaits awakening, as all souls do. I tell you, the land still hums with the memory of holiness. The stones remember the footsteps of prophets. The wind remembers the Psalms of David. But the heart of man must remember too. Until it does, the nation will remain a vessel of potential, not fulfillment. When I gazed upon the vibration of that land, I did not see only politics and war. I saw a deeper hunger, a collective soul yearning to return to the source. That is, the Israel God recognizes not a flag, not a policy, but a heart turning home. And so I speak these words not to divide, but to awaken. The Israel you see is the shell. The Israel of God is the seed within. Nations may claim the name, but only the righteous carry the vibration. I have seen it, and I say it plainly. The true Israel is not lost, but waiting to be remembered in every heart that dares to live in covenant again. In the book of Genesis, the covenant was spoken with solemn power. To your descendants I give this land. When I looked deeper into the record of the soul, I saw that the covenant was not a contract between a deity and a tribe, but a pattern by which divine law enters human experience. In Genesis, when the Eternal spoke to Abram, saying, "To your seed I give this land," the words carried vibration, not only instruction. It was not soil that was promised, it was a field of consciousness where spirit and matter could meet, where obedience could make the invisible visible. The land was symbol and instrument, a living temple where the laws of heaven would take form upon earth. I saw how men reduced it to territory, to stones and boundaries, but in truth the covenant was a mirror. When man was aligned with divine order, the land flourished. When he turned from it, the ground itself reflected his disobedience with famine, division, and exile. The covenant is not a gift that cannot be broken. It is a current that flows only through harmony. Abraham's seed were to be keepers of this current, not possessors of a map. In vision, I saw how this truth was inscribed into the structure of creation itself. Every atom responds to vibration. Every living thing thrives only when attuned to the pattern that gave it birth. The covenant was that same law applied to nations. It said, in essence, as you honor the source, so shall the earth honor you. This was the mystery of Canaan, the promised land, not that it was rich in resources, but that it was chosen as a testing ground of divine order. Canaan was vast, its boundaries stretching beyond modern Israel, touching the waters of Lebanon, the deserts of Egypt, the plains of Jordan. Yet its true center was invisible, existing where faith met obedience. The land itself had no holiness, apart from the consciousness of those who walked upon it. When the people turned their eyes to idols, the vibration fell, the song of the soil was silenced, and exile followed as naturally as night follows day. God did not curse them. They stepped out of resonance. That is the law that governs both soul and nation. I tell you, every nation upon earth stands within a covenant, whether it knows it or not. The Eternal gives not only form, but purpose. And where purpose is forgotten, form decays. Israel was intended to be the demonstration of alignment, the laboratory of divine government. Through their obedience, the pattern of heaven would show itself upon earth. Justice balanced with mercy, order tempered with compassion. The laws of Moses were not arbitrary rules, but codified vibrations, disciplines of thought and behavior designed to keep the people attuned. Each festival, each commandment, each act of rest upon the seventh day was a note in the symphony of the covenant. But men forgot the music and remembered only the words. They performed the rituals, but lost the rhythm. And so the covenant, though eternal, withdrew from expression, not from existence. I was shown the moment when the people entered Canaan under Joshua. The land responded. The harvests were rich, the rivers clear. The vibration of obedience filled the air. Yet slowly pride entered the illusion that the blessing was possession rather than reflection. They began to believe that the land belonged to them by right, not by resonance. It was then that the pattern began to break. Kingdoms rose and fell. Prophets cried and were ignored. Temples were built and desecrated, all because men confused the outer symbol with the inner law. Even Solomon, in all his wisdom, built a temple to contain what was meant to be lived. The covenant was spirit, not structure. It cannot be stored in a city, it must be carried in the heart. The modern world, with its borders and armies, repeats this ancient confusion. It fights for the shell and forgets the seed. The same vibration that once flowed through Israel still seeks expression, not through soil, but through souls ready to be obedient to divine order again. I have often been asked, if the covenant is spiritual, why was land promised at all? And I answer, because spirit must always find form. A covenant without form is theory. Form without spirit is idolatry. The land was never reward. It was responsibility. To dwell in it was to live in agreement with divine law, to demonstrate that peace on earth is possible when the inner and outer worlds reflect one another. Abraham's descendants were meant to model this alignment, showing the nations that heaven's rule brings harmony. But when alignment broke, the land became battlefield, and the promise became history instead of present truth. The prophets who arose after saw this clearly. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they all spoke not of geography, but of renewal of heart. I will write my law upon their inward parts, said the Lord through Jeremiah. That was the restoration of the covenant. Even the exile was not punishment, but correction, a return to remembrance. When the people were scattered, the covenant followed them, waiting for recognition. It was never confined to borders, it was carried in the spirit. And now, as I look upon the earth in this century, I see the same principle unfolding again. The people who call themselves Israel have the land, but not yet the vibration. They possess the promise, but not yet the obedience. The soil still remembers, but the hearts have forgotten. Yet within that forgetting lies hope, for every cycle in creation carries its own renewal. The covenant cannot die because it is woven into the law of being. Whenever a soul turns to God in sincerity, that soul enters the same covenant Abraham entered. The promise of the land becomes the promise of peace within. The geography shifts from earth to consciousness. That is the deeper reading of Genesis. The story of a man who left the known to find the unseen, who trusted the invisible pattern of divine order. Every seeker who walks that same path becomes a child of Abraham and an heir to the same promise. The land then becomes symbol of dominion over self, victory of spirit over matter. The Canaan of today lies within, and the borders are drawn not by governments but by thoughts. The covenant remains as invitation, walk before me and be whole. That wholeness is the true inheritance. So when the world debates who owns Israel, the wise understand that ownership is illusion, stewardship is truth. God never gave land as property, only as platform. The covenant is not about possession but participation. The moment a nation forgets this, it loses the harmony that sustains its peace. Jacob was not a myth but a mirror, and his struggle at the river was the moment when humanity first learned that the divine must be wrestled with, not merely worshipped. I have seen that night in vision, the air thick with silence, the water dark as unspoken fear, and Jacob alone with the weight of his name. He was not fighting an angel of flesh, but the reflection of his own divided nature. And when the dawn broke, a new vibration entered the world. The voice said, "You have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed." From that struggle, the name Israel was born, and with it, the eternal symbol of the soul's evolution. To be Israel was never to be owner of a territory, it was to be carrier of a consciousness, a state of being that wrestles toward light and refuses to surrender to ignorance. The moment the Eternal touched Jacob's thigh and left him limping, it was to remind all who came after that enlightenment leaves its mark, that to walk with God is to walk wounded, yet awake. That limp became the proof of contact. I tell you, every nation that claims the name Israel must bear that same mark, humility born of encounter. Without it, the name is a mask. The 12 tribes that descended from Jacob were not simply bloodlines, but principles, divine attributes, distributed among humanity: faith, justice, mercy, order, courage, wisdom, patience, devotion, prophecy, purity, perseverance, and love. These were the pillars of the covenant people, each tribe a facet of the soul's complete reflection. When they lived in balance, the nation prospered. When they betrayed one another, the harmony shattered. The story of Israel is not ethnic history, it is spiritual anatomy. Jacob's name changed because identity itself changed. He became the archetype of every soul that turns from deception to truth. For before he was Israel, he was the supplanter, the trickster who grasped what was not his by cunning. After the struggle, he became the vessel of divine purpose. So too must every people, every generation, transform from grasping to giving, from manipulation to surrender. The covenant cannot dwell in a mind that seeks power. It lives only in hearts that seek alignment. I saw that the name Israel contains vibration, a frequency that calls forth awakening wherever it is spoken with understanding. When spoken in pride, it loses its power. When spoken in reverence, it awakens the divine memory. The true Israel, as I have read in the records of the soul, exists not as one nation, but as a gathering of consciousness across the earth, souls in every race and tongue who have wrestled with their own darkness and emerged with light in their eyes. They are the living continuation of that night by the river, the modern Jacob who dares to confront the inner angel. This is why I say the Israel of God is not confined to geography, for spirit recognizes no borders. The divine promise was never limited to lineage, but to vibration, and whoever lives in obedience to divine law becomes heir to that promise. I have watched through the flow of time how this truth has been forgotten, how religion hardened into identity, and how men began to protect the outer sign rather than cultivate the inner fire. When Israel became a kingdom, it lost the purity of its name. When it became a state, it lost the memory of its struggle. The modern Israel calls itself chosen, yet forgets that the chosen are those who choose God. Being chosen is not privilege, it is burden. It means to bear witness to truth, even when surrounded by lies. The Jacob within each of us must rise and fight the angel of illusion until dawn. The limp we carry after is not weakness, it is testimony. The prophets understood this. They warned that the heart, not the temple, was the dwelling place of the Most High. They cried against the kings who built monuments while neglecting mercy, who honored the name of Israel but betrayed its meaning. And when their words were ignored, exile followed, as it always does when form outweighs essence. For when the soul forgets its struggle, the spirit withdraws to teach remembrance. Every civilization mirrors this pattern: birth, pride, decline, renewal. The law is constant, only the scenery changes. I tell you, the moment Jacob was renamed, the divine planted within humanity the pattern of redemption. Every conflict since is but a reflection of that first wrestling. Nations fight nations, faiths oppose faiths, yet beneath it all, the same angel wrestles with mankind, asking the same question: will you surrender to truth or cling to illusion? The covenant people were to answer that question with their lives. But as history shows, they too forgot, and the name Israel passed from revelation to ritual. Even today, many speak it with reverence, but live it with blindness. They fight over soil, but ignore spirit. They protect tradition, but neglect transformation. Yet the vibration still calls. I have heard it in meditation, a pulse that runs through the heart of the world, summoning the lost Jacob within humanity to wake once more. It whispers, remember who you are. You are the one who wrestles, not the one who possesses. When that memory returns, the nations will no longer need prophets to rebuke them, for the covenant will live again in the conscience of man. Until then, the world remains divided, half remembering, half asleep. I have seen in vision that the restoration of Israel will not come through politics or power, but through a great inner turning, when enough souls recognize that the true promised land is the awakened heart. That day will mark the real fulfillment of the covenant, for then the wrestling will cease, and Jacob's limp will become the dance of the redeemed. Until that hour, the name Israel stands as both warning and promise. It warns that no nation may use divine names for worldly gain without consequence, and it promises that any soul who dares to wrestle with God in truth will find illumination. I tell you truly, after the flood of war and the ruin of faith that swept the earth, I beheld the birth of a nation that called itself Israel, and the angels that keep the records whispered, "This is not the covenant restored, but a shadow seeking light." The year was 1,948 inches, the counting of men, yet in the reckoning of spirit, it was the hour of human will rising to rebuild what fear had scattered. I saw the souls of a people long persecuted, driven by grief and longing for home, and their cry reached the heavens. The Eternal heard, as he always hears, and permitted that the land once called Promised should again be gathered under one name. But I saw also that the forces moving upon the earth were mixed, for not all who built the new Israel sought God. Many sought only safety, and others sought power. The movement that brought them there was born not in temples, but in councils, not upon altars, but upon papers signed by nations. It was the age of Zionism, the child of necessity, the response of humanity to centuries of injustice. I do not condemn it, for the law of cause and effect governs all creation, and every wound seeks healing. But I saw that the healing of the body does not always mean the healing of the soul. Theodor Herzl, the father of this dream, wrote with vision yet without revelation, desiring a place of rest for his brethren, not a renewal of the covenant. His purpose was mercy, clothed in politics, noble in motive, yet limited in scope, for he sought to save a people, but not to restore their obedience. Thus the foundation was laid upon the stone of survival, not upon the rock of spirit. And when the nations of the world, moved by guilt and compassion, agreed to his cause, they too acted from the will of man, not the will of heaven. It was a birth permitted by the Eternal, but not proclaimed by him, for divine law allows man to create, yet tests every creation by its fruits. I saw then the great gathering, ships crossing seas, refugees walking deserts, families rebuilding cities upon ruins. The earth trembled with their hope, yet the air carried a strange silence, for in the midst of their songs there was little prayer. They celebrated their flag, their borders, their victory over extinction, but few remembered the command that made their fathers chosen, "Be holy as I am holy." I saw that the angels who watched the nations recorded their rejoicing, but also their forgetting. The covenant was mentioned but not renewed. In those days I heard the voices of pastors and teachers across the Christian world declaring, "Prophecy is fulfilled. The fig tree blooms again." And I asked the Spirit, "Is this the fulfillment?" And the Spirit replied, "The tree has leaves, but where is its fruit? For the Lord does not bless appearance. He blesses obedience." I tell you, the return of the people to the land was an outer sign of an inner call still unanswered. The soil was ready, but the hearts remained unbroken. And so the land that should have become a sanctuary became instead a stage of struggle, for every promise ignored becomes a prophecy repeated. The wars that followed were not only battles of armies, but reflections of the greater war within the soul of man, the conflict between remembrance and pride. I saw leaders rise who spoke of strength, who armed themselves with wisdom of the world, but forgot the wisdom of the prophets. I saw temples rebuilt, yet spirits hollow. The divine presence does not dwell where justice is forsaken. And I heard the same warning spoken to ancient kings echo again through the modern halls. You have returned to the land, but not to me. The modern Israel became a symbol to the world, and the world divided over it, some blessing it blindly, others cursing it unjustly, yet few discerning the truth, that the hand of God cannot be claimed by any government. His covenant belongs not to flags, but to hearts. When I beheld all this, I did not despair, for I saw in the higher record that God uses even human ambition to fulfill divine purpose. Out of every confusion, he draws clarity. Out of every rebellion, he calls repentance. The modern state may have begun as a political answer, but the spirit waits still for its awakening. I saw that one day, when the noise of war has spent itself and the pride of men has cooled, a remnant shall arise among them who will remember the true Israel, not the state of walls and weapons, but the nation of conscience and compassion. Then shall the covenant stir again in the hearts of those who seek not dominion but righteousness. Until that hour, the land will be restless, for it bears both blessing and warning. It is both home and mirror. And the Spirit said to me, Watch, for when men begin to call holiness greater than heritage, then shall Israel be born anew. I wrote these words not to judge, but to preserve what was shown that the promise of God cannot be fulfilled by policy, but only by purity. The nation may exist by decree, but only the covenant can make it sacred. And until Spirit rules matter once more, Israel shall remain a sign unto the nations, proof that man can return to the land without yet returning to God. Israel stands at the center of the world's unrest, both as victim and as mirror. Surrounded by nations that remember ancient wounds, it fights to survive, yet in defending itself it often repeats the very cruelties from which it once fled. Since 1948, the land has been soaked in both prayer and blood, each generation inheriting the fear of the one before. Every war, every border drawn in fire, exposes not only political conflict, but spiritual imbalance. The covenant was meant to make Israel a channel of peace, but when fear governs, peace becomes impossible. The prophets foresaw this, warning that when the people trust in chariots more than in the Lord, their strength turns to dust. Modern Israel possesses unmatched power, yet the vibration of its heart trembles. Power without purity breeds perpetual defense, for the conscience knows what walls cannot hide. Nations that surround it speak of revenge, and Israel answers with force, and the cycle turns endlessly. The occupation of the weak by the strong may win land, but it loses harmony. The soul of a people cannot be secure while others live beneath its shadow. The eternal, never justified cruelty is self-preservation. Justice and mercy are twins, and to separate them is to break the covenant itself. I have read in the records of the soul that no nation remains safe by fear, only by alignment. True security is the byproduct of righteousness. The wars of Israel reveal not prophecy fulfilled, but prophecy postponed. For prophecy is not the prediction of fate, but the reflection of condition. The land that once sang with psalms now echoes with sirens, yet beneath the noise the divine purpose still waits, unaltered and patient. The suffering of Palestinians and the grief of Israelis are not opposites, but fragments of the same broken mirror. Each side reflects humanity's deeper wound, the illusion of separateness. Every rocket, every retaliation proclaims the same ignorance, that peace can be won by punishment. The covenant people were chosen to demonstrate the opposite, that peace is born from alignment, not domination. Yet even in conflict, grace whispers. I have seen souls among both peoples whose compassion pierces the hatred around them, whose prayers rise above politics. They are the remnant through whom renewal will come. For the Spirit does not measure nations by victories, but by mercy. When the heart of Israel remembers compassion, the desert will bloom again. When it forgets, even victory becomes exile. The same law governs all America, Persia, Egypt, every land under heaven. No one escapes the measure of justice. The wars of the Middle East are not accidents, but symptoms, the outer tremors of the inner earthquake of human pride. Only when humility returns will peace find soil to grow. Until then, the land remains both promise and warning, a living parable written in dust and fire, declaring that power without righteousness cannot sustain itself, and that the covenant of God, though patient, is never mocked. Israel stands at the center of the world's unrest, both as victim and as mirror. Surrounded by nations that remember ancient wounds, it fights to survive, yet in defending itself it often repeats the very cruelties from which it once fled. Since 1948, the land has been soaked in both prayer and blood, each generation inheriting the fear of the one before. Every war, every border drawn in fire exposes not only political conflict, but spiritual imbalance. The covenant was meant to make Israel a channel of peace, but when fear governs, peace becomes impossible. The prophets foresaw this, warning that when the people trust in chariots more than in the Lord, their strength turns to dust. Modern Israel possesses unmatched power, yet the vibration of its heart trembles. Power without purity breeds perpetual defense, for the conscience knows what walls cannot hide. Nations that surround it speak of revenge, and Israel answers with force, and the cycle turns endlessly. The occupation of the weak by the strong may win land, but it loses harmony. The soul of a people cannot be secure while others live beneath its shadow. The eternal never justified cruelty is self-preservation. Justice and mercy are twins, and to separate them is to break the covenant itself. I have read in the records of the soul that no nation remains safe by fear, only by alignment. True security is the byproduct of righteousness. The wars of Israel reveal not prophecy fulfilled, but prophecy postponed. For prophecy is not the prediction of fate, but the reflection of condition. The land that once sang with psalms now echoes with sirens. Yet beneath the noise, the divine purpose still waits, unaltered and patient. The suffering of Palestinians and the grief of Israelis are not opposites, but fragments of the same broken mirror. Each side reflects humanity's deeper wound, the illusion of separateness. Every rocket, every retaliation proclaims the same ignorance, that peace can be won by punishment. The covenant people were chosen to demonstrate the opposite, that peace is born from alignment, not domination. Yet even in conflict, grace whispers. I have seen souls among both peoples whose compassion pierces the hatred around them, whose prayers rise above politics. They are the remnant through whom renewal will come. For the Spirit does not measure nations by victories, but by mercy. When the heart of Israel remembers compassion, the desert will bloom again. When it forgets, even victory becomes exile. The same law governs all America, Persia, Egypt, every land under heaven. No one escapes the measure of justice. The wars of the Middle East are not accidents, but symptoms, the outer tremors of the inner earthquake of human pride. Only when humility returns will peace find soil to grow. Until then, the land remains both promise and warning, a living parable written in dust and fire, declaring that power without righteousness cannot sustain itself, and that the covenant of God, though patient, is never mocked. Zionism began as a dream of refuge, but has become the instrument through which politics cloaks itself in prophecy. It was born in the late 19th century when the soul of the Jewish people, exhausted by centuries of exile and persecution, sought an earthly home. Yet not all who carried its banner were seekers of God. Many were men of reason and ambition, who believed culture, not covenant, could redeem their people. In their vision, religion was heritage, not law, and faith was replaced by nationalism. Theodor Herzl and his companions were not prophets, but architects, and their blueprints were drawn with ink of necessity, not revelation. Still, heaven permitted it, for every movement that begins in pain carries some thread of divine purpose. But when that thread is woven with pride, the pattern becomes tangled. Zionism was meant to gather a scattered people. Instead, it gathered both the faithful and the faithless under one name, and that name became a symbol both holy and political. The early Zionists did not seek the God of Abraham. They sought the safety of survival. They desired freedom from persecution, yet they built upon human strategy rather than spiritual surrender. The result was inevitable: a nation reborn in strength, but not yet in spirit. I have seen in the records of the soul that every idea that departs from divine order must eventually be corrected by its own consequences. The Zionist movement achieved its goal, a homeland restored, but at the cost of unity between heaven and earth. Its founders built walls of defense, but forgot the temple within. They won sovereignty, but lost serenity. And now the world argues endlessly about influence, about power, about the reach of Zionism across politics, media, and finance. The truth lies neither in denial nor in conspiracy. Influence follows energy, and where the will is strong, the world responds. Yet influence without illumination becomes manipulation. The danger of modern Zionism is not that it exists, but that it forgets why it began. When survival becomes identity, morality fades. The soul of Israel, once meant to reveal divine justice, becomes entangled in worldly ambition. The nations that align with it often do so not from faith, but from fear, from the calculation of alliance and advantage. The result is a network of interests bound by necessity rather than righteousness. And still, preachers proclaim that to oppose Zionism is to oppose God. But God is not mocked by slogans. His covenant cannot be lobbied. His presence cannot be legislated. The Eternal does not dwell in power. He dwells in purity. When the modern state uses holy language to defend unholy acts, the vibration of hypocrisy echoes across heaven. Yet I say again, let no one fall into hatred, for hatred is the shadow of pride. The human heart, whether Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, is sacred soil, and every accusation of conspiracy becomes poison to the very spirit that seeks truth. The true student of prophecy must walk the narrow path between blindness and bitterness. To ignore corruption is cowardice. To despise a people is ignorance. The wise discern the principle without condemning the person. For there are many within Israel and beyond who still hear the inner call, who live by the light of compassion and pray not for domination but for peace. They are the living thread that keeps the name Israel from extinction. Without them, the vibration of the covenant would fade entirely from the earth. And I have seen in vision that this remnant shall grow when the old idols fall, idols of nationalism, of pride, of fear disguised as strength. When the world's empires tire of their own deception, they will look again toward spirit, and Zionism itself will be refined, transformed from political banner into spiritual awakening. For what began as the gathering of bodies must become the gathering of souls. Then shall the prophecy find fulfillment not in governments, but in consciousness. Those who now use religion to justify oppression will be silenced by the weight of their own fruit, for nothing that violates divine law can stand forever. The history of nations is proof enough. Egypt fell, Babylon fell, Rome fell, not by force, but by the slow corrosion of pride. So shall every movement that forgets the source. Zionism will endure only when it surrenders its will to the higher will, when it becomes again what it never fully was, the outward reflection of inward faith. Until that hour, it remains a paradox, half light, half shadow, its leaders claiming heaven while serving earth. And yet within that paradox lies possibility, for the Spirit never abandons what still carries its name. The Eternal waits patiently for remembrance. When Israel and her supporters awaken to the truth that covenant means conscience, not conquest, the balance of the world will shift. The power that now divides will heal. But if they continue to cloak ambition in holiness, the law of return will manifest not as blessing, but as lesson, and the very strength they boast of will become their teacher. For divine order allows no deceit to prosper long. Every misuse of the sacred summons its own correction. The world speaks of influence and control, of media and money. Yet behind all these illusions stands the deeper truth that spirit governs substance. When Israel remembers that, Zion will become not a fortress but a light upon the hill. When I look upon the world as it is now, I see prophecy not as prediction, but as reflection, a mirror held before humanity to reveal the state of its soul. Israel stands in that mirror as both symbol and teacher, not because of its power or its suffering, but because within its story the entire pattern of mankind is repeated, the covenant offered, forgotten, and awaiting remembrance. I have seen in the records of the soul that every nation carries a vibration, a spiritual tone that reveals whether it walks in harmony or in rebellion. Israel's tone trembles between light and shadow, between the remembrance of holiness and the pride of survival. Yet even in its dissonance, it calls the world to awareness. For the story of Israel is the story of consciousness itself, chosen to awaken, tempted to forget, judged by its own creation, and redeemed only through alignment with the divine law that governs all. The wars, the borders, the politics are but outer garments. Beneath them, spirit continues its patient work. The covenant was never revoked. It only waits to be remembered. And that remembrance must begin not with governments or priests, but with the individual soul. Each time a human heart forgives instead of retaliates, speaks truth instead of propaganda, acts in mercy instead of fear, the vibration of the true Israel is restored upon the earth. That is why the promise to Abraham was both singular and universal. It began with one man, but was meant for all. The land, the lineage, the law, all were forms through which a deeper order could unfold, the order of consciousness returning to its source. When the Christ came, he embodied that same covenant, saying that the kingdom of God is within. That word still stands as the final revelation. The covenant of geography is given way to the covenant of spirit. Whoever lives in obedience to love becomes citizen of that kingdom, and wherever such souls gather, there is Israel reborn. I have watched through the inner sight how every prayer, every act of compassion sends light across the web of the world. The divisions men worship are temporary illusions. The unity they fear is the truth that endures. In the higher record, the earth itself is seen as one field, each nation a different note in the same divine chord. The disharmony of war is but the rehearsal of awakening. The Eternal does not punish. He teaches. Every exile is a call to return, every conflict a mirror of inner disunity. The prophecy of Israel will be fulfilled, not when one flag rules the land, but when all hearts recognize that there is no chosen people apart from those who choose God daily. The true temple will not be built with stones, but with awareness. The Messiah whom men await is not a warrior from heaven, but the awakening of the divine within humanity. When enough souls embody that light, the boundaries of nations will lose their sting, and the old enmities will dissolve like shadows before dawn. I know this not by belief, but by vision. I have seen the records of future possibility, shimmering like stars across time, and in them a remnant of every faith walking together in understanding. Their words are few, but their presence changes the vibration of the earth. They will not claim victory. They will manifest peace. That is the destiny waiting behind every prophecy, not destruction, but transformation. And until that day comes, the lesson remains that no nation, no creed, no people can claim God while denying his image in others. The wars of Israel, the struggles of humanity, are all one lesson spoken in many tongues, that love is the only covenant unbroken. When the world learns this, the promise to Abraham will finally flower in full. Then Israel will be not a nation, but a name for the awakened human race, a sign that the wrestling is over and the blessing received. Until then, I speak what was shown, that every soul is part of that story, every heart carries a piece of that covenant. The map of the Spirit is vast, yet every path returns to the same source. The end of prophecy is not fear, but remembrance. The end of history is not ruin, but revelation. And in that revelation, the light that once shone from a desert people will shine again through all, until the whole earth becomes the promised land. And the covenant fulfilled is simply this, that God and man are one,